Oh, yes.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. It is so lovely to see so many of you here in real life after months and months of endless Zooms and online events. It's great to see real faces looking back and not staring at our own faces for once. And it's particularly exciting to be here with this selection of really brilliant writers to talk about their fascinating books, all published by Murky Books, which I'm sure you will all know is the publishing imprint set up by Stormzy, who's a musician you might have heard of, and by Penguin Random House UK in order to promote underrepresented voices. In a moment, I'm going to be talking to the boxer and model and activist Ramla Ali, who's written this brilliant book, Not Without a Fight. But first, two very exciting authors who are the successive recipients of the now celebrated Merky New Writers Prize, which is a prize which aims to promote and to discover new writers, underrepresented, unpublished between the ages of 16 and 30 from the UK and from Ireland. So Hafsa Zayyan was the joint winner of the inaugural award in 2019. That was for her beautiful and brilliant debut novel, which is We Are All Birds of Uganda. And if you haven't read it, you're really in for a treat. It's a beautiful and brilliant novel which tells of love and of belonging and identity, colonialization, and so much more, which I hope we will hear from you, not from me. It's been garnered with praise left, right, and centre, quite rightly so. And as I say, if you haven't read it yet, you've certainly got a treat in store. And also, Jyoti Patel joins us. She won the prize this year for her novel Six of One, which explores, I think, as we'll discover, quite a lot of similar themes, family and identity, navigating between two cultures. And her book is yet to be published. We have to wait till 2023, if I'm right. But I know that we certainly also have a treat in store with that. And the judges have described her writing as quite extraordinary. But you haven't, as I say, come to hear about their books from me when we have them both sitting here. So thank you both very much indeed for joining us and for doing this. And I'd love to just ask you both first what winning that award meant to you both, and kind of how, if it changed your life and your plans. We'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was kind of like a dream come true. I had always thought about writing, but never considered actually pursuing it as a career. I went into law. I'm a lawyer. The competition was very, very simple to enter, and I didn't actually have a book when I entered it, and so it was very much like, never been published before, and as you mentioned, and not represented authors anyway. So I entered, and winning was like genuinely like a childhood dream that was being fulfilled. I would say it's changed my life in the sense that I can proudly say I'm a published author now, which is just an amazing thing that I never thought I'd be able to say. And also, getting praise from people like Mallory Blackman, Stormzy, it's just, it's a different life to the life that I was leading before. So yeah, it's definitely changed my life.
Well, what about you? A similar story of life-changing dreams come true?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I wanted to be an author since I was a kid, so it was amazing for it to happen, and to win such a prestigious prize, and for it to all happen so publicly was, an absolute dream come true. And I always thought writing a book, even though it's like always been my dream, would be something that I did, when I was retired or when I'd had a long career doing something else. So it's so nice that, prizes like this exist to get young authors in the publishing industry, and also authors who may not always see themselves represented on bookshelves. So it's been a total dream, and I'm so grateful.
It's so nice to hear that from both of you. Not that you're exactly going to sit here and say, nonchalantly that it didn't matter, but it obviously comes across that it was a really wonderful opportunity for you both. And perhaps, so I very, very briefly said about your books, I don't think I've described the stories because I'd much rather, and I'm sure people would much rather hear from you. But perhaps you could outline what We Are All Birds of Uganda is about.
Sure, yeah. It's the story of the South Asian migration to East Africa, to Uganda in particular, which started generations ago, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And the particular story here focuses in more recent history, but 1945, on towards 1972, which is when the South Asians were expelled from Uganda and migrated to the UK and also other parts of the world. So it's really that's really what the story is about. We've got this huge kind of South Asian, East African diaspora living in the UK and kind of in other parts of the world, and it's just a story that I hadn't really heard much about before I met my husband, who is South Asian Ugandan, and he told me about it, and I thought, well, this is a story that a lot of people don't know, maybe in my generation at least. At the time, it was a major media story, but that's really what it covers. There's two narratives. So there's a historic narrative, which is set at that time, 45, 72 and onwards, and then there's a modern day narrative, which charts the story of a modern day kind of second generation Ugandan Asian immigrant living in London, just trying to figure out who he is and diving a little bit deeper into his past.
How did you, that first narrative that you talk about that's very much set sort of in the past, how did you go about, because it's incredibly meticulously accurate and researched, all the history. Did you spend a lot of time researching that?
Yeah, I had to. I spent time interviewing people from that background. I spent lots of time in the British Library. I read academic articles, I watched YouTube videos, I read oral history projects. I mean, I kind of just trawled the internet, which is obviously an incredible resource. It's something that there is actually a lot of information about out there because there are so many of these people living in the world, but it's just not something that's necessarily in the mainstream or like in the public eye so much. So once you start digging, you can get quite a lot. So yeah, I did tons of research for that part of the story.
And we'll come back to some of the themes that unite your books, but perhaps you could, I mean, I don't know, is it spoilers? You can tell us what it is about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Six of One is a coming of age story. It's told between the perspectives of a mother and her son. And it's very much the son, Nick's journey of coming to understand the circumstances of his father's death. So his dad dies just before he himself is born. And like I say, it's told between their perspectives, and it's also told between the fictive present, which is like 2017, and the moments of Avni, who's the mother, her childhood in 80s Britain. So it's really inviting the reader to explore the differences in their experiences growing up as people of colour in the UK. In those particular time periods, and inviting the reader to look at if we've moved on and how. So yeah, it was really fun to write, and I'm currently in the process of editing it with my lovely editor at Merky. So I'm really excited for it to be on shelves.
And I mean, one of the things that I said at the beginning that sort of I think really comes, we haven't had the chance to read it, but you've outlined it and we've spoken about it a bit before, that comes across in both books, and actually perhaps we might talk about it with Ramla afterwards as well, is navigating between the two cultures and the contrast that sort of brings with it, and the contradictions, but particularly between the families and the generations. And in your book, there's the very strong sense of belief and belief systems that the parents have in both scenarios, and it pulls apart the families, the dreams of love or careers that the second generation have. And I wonder, how did you sort of feel? It feels to me like it's a contradiction and a conflict that isn't ever resolved.
Yeah, I think one of the major themes of my novel was generational divides, and also kind of historically, attitudes and how those attitudes, racial attitudes and other attitudes, attitudes towards familial responsibilities, how they kind of cross across the generations, and whether they morph or whether they disappear and how they change. And so those were kind of some of the major themes of the novel. I think, this novel kind of broadly tries to raise similar questions as you were saying, Jyoti, to leave in the reader's mind how has anything changed, and has it actually changed? And that's a journey that Samir himself goes on and he explores. He's the main modern day protagonist.
Well, what's interesting is that, and again, I feel like we will explore this also with Ramla, is that they're torn between their dreams, but there's also a deep empathy and understanding of their parents' worries and wanting to sort of hold them back, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I think you outline really well and dig deep in your book, and it's something that's definitely something that I explore in mine too. And I think just looking at the experiences of families who have immigrated here, and the differences between the generations, from everything from like the jobs that we believe we're allowed to go and pursue. Like, I don't think my parents' generation would have ever dreamt of going and studying English at uni, like I was lucky enough to do. And there are so many nuances to the experiences, I think, of multi-generational families and immigrant families and people of colour in the UK. So I think it's something that you could just explore forever in literature, and there's so much room to explore.
And you both do it sort of, as you say. I mean, I haven't had the chance, but it has been the kind of really is a theme that comes up again and again in the book. Can I ask, because we don't have nearly as much time as I'd love to have with you both, and we also move on to questions from the audience, and I'm sure you have many. But in terms of, I said at the beginning, this prize underrepresented writers that it was looking for. I just wonder, did you feel like you had read enough of your own of those stories? Had you read enough of stories that you recognised yourselves in?
I definitely don't think I did growing up. And like I say, I studied literature at university, and then I went and studied creative writing for a master's. And it wasn't really until I started reading widely and started reading books that I wasn't being given at school or at university, and I wasn't seeing written about. I was just sort of discovering them through word of mouth and really like digging to find them. That's when I started feeling like I could bring my experience and the experiences of my family and people who are from the similar backgrounds to me to my writing. I'd always written about people who didn't look like me and who didn't have a life like me. So I think representation is so important. And there's been so many people who've spoken about this before, and I just can't sort of talk enough about how much it impacts the stories you feel you're allowed to write when you're young and when you are a writer.
I completely agree with absolutely everything you've said. I mean, the books are there. They're just not brought to the fore. You're not introduced to them until you go and look for them. Like, you don't know these stories unless you make an effort to go and find these stories. And I think one of the really interesting things about the Murky Books Initiative, it being with such a huge institution like Penguin Random House, the largest publisher in the world, is that they're trying to get these books into the mainstream. These are stories that not just people from our backgrounds would read. And of course, it's lovely to have people reach out to you and to say, I feel really seen, I feel really represented, thank you for writing my story. But it's also really lovely to have people who are not from that background reach out to you and say, thank you for educating me on this topic. I've really learned a lot. And so, yeah, I think the books are there, but it's all about kind of bringing them more into the mainstream.
Can I pick you up on something you said at the beginning when I asked you about how it felt winning the award? You said you hadn't written anything. So how did that work?
Not very well. It was quite difficult.
You were in a different career at that time.
Yeah, no, I still am. So I like I said, I'm a lawyer. I won the prize with I think like roughly 20,000 words. So I'd written 2,500 words to enter the competition. I was shortlisted. They asked for full manuscripts in 7 days, and I was like, oh. So I wrote as much as I could in 7 days, which was about 20,000 words.
Wow.
And so then I sent that off and kind of thought, well, that's the end of this then, because obviously everybody else will probably have full manuscripts. But then, to my great surprise, I was actually selected. And so then I had the process of then quickly having to write the book.
How did the process work for you? You're nodding, but I think
it was very different for me.
Okay, tell us
I'm
how it
nodding
worked
in
for you.
admiration. That's amazing. No, so I had started writing this around 2017, 2018. Smashed out like a draft. It was very bad. It was like the junk draft. And then sort of put it aside, came back to it, put it aside, came back to it. And by the time I submitted the 1,500 words, I think it was, for this competition, I had like maybe 40,000 words that I liked of the novel. And I was really stuck in terms of like how I was going to proceed and finish the story and look at like the shape of the plot. And I'd been stuck for a long time, and just being longlisted gave me the boost and the validation to finish. So I was then shortlisted, and by the time I'd won, I had a 90,000 word draft that I was really happy with. And something that we touched on earlier about representation on bookshelves, I think is also really important to say at Merky. I think the thing that helped me so much was speaking to Lamara at the time, who was the commissioning editor, still is, and she had a one-to-one with me when I think I was longlisted. And it was her talking to me about my book and understanding the nuances of what I was trying to do that gave me the validation and the push to keep writing. And I've done various creative writing things before, and I'd never had that because really I was getting someone who understood my experience on a different level. So I think representation is great in terms of authors, but it means so much as well as a writer of colour, seeing people who understand the nuances of what I'm trying to write in the industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the next step, is encouraging like people from underrepresented backgrounds in to be gatekeepers in the industry, because I think that's really how we'll see great books on shelves that aren't getting the time of day at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the next step, are you? I mean, you might be top secret, but what is next? I mean, you're working on your edit,
Yeah.
and we'll all eagerly anticipate that coming onto our shelves. But what's next for you?
I get asked this question all the time, and I just always...
I secretly heard you on the Penguin podcast talking about it, so I'm asking, pretending I don't.
I have some ideas. I have to admit that nothing has been committed to paper, but I am actually about to. I have an essay in a collection of essays coming out at the end of this month with HarperCollins, and it's because I'm half Nigerian, half Pakistani. It's about my relationship with Nigeria, and so this collection of essays is called "Of This Our Country," and it has a very vast array of extremely amazing Nigerian talented authors writing about their relationships with Nigeria, all the way from people like Ellams, Chimamanda, myself. I don't know how, but somehow. And so that's the project that I had been working on and is coming out at the end of this month.
I thought you were going to. Have you got something else?
Oh no, I was just again nodding in admiration.
No, that was what I was going to say. I mean, you're doing that next, but in terms of winning and writing this book and this award and doing that research you were talking about in the British Library, I expect that's fueled a lot of interest that perhaps you didn't get elsewhere into that history.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I mean, I feel like writing the book for me was a journey in and of itself. I knew about the story. I learned a lot more about the story. I made a trip to Uganda. I spoke to people there. I spoke to my in-laws a lot more about their stories. But I think also just generally the feedback that I've had on the book. And there's a long bibliography at the end of the book, which again is probably fairly unusual in fiction. But I've had a lot of people say thank you for the sources. Like I've been digging in, and I've had a look, and I've kind of delved a bit deeper as well.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating hearing from you both, and I would love you to come back onto the stage in about 20-25 minutes, because if any of you have got questions, you can store them up for the next 20 minutes and then ask them at the end when they come back. But thank you both very, very much indeed. It's really wonderful hearing about your work.
Thank you, Hannah.
So just moving on to the next section of the event, sort of two separate events rolled into one, but also, as I say, we'll be able to ask questions at the end of both. And are you all right?
I just want to see.
Yes, a bit more intimate. Now there's just two of us. So I'm really very, very thrilled to welcome my next guest, and that we all have the chance to hear her extraordinary story. And I think we probably use the word extraordinary quite a lot, but it really is that, and it's profoundly inspirational. I've been following her journey for the past few years, since I was lucky enough to interview her in 2018. I have been watching on in complete awe, so I'm just delighted that it's filling the pages of this brilliant new book, Not Without a Fight, 10 Steps to Becoming Your Own Champion, which does tell her story that starts with arriving in the UK from a war-torn Somalia and going on to rock the boxing world. And not just that, but to become the first professional boxer from Somalia, the first to compete in the Olympic Games. She's also a model and an activist, a humanitarian, but there's so much more, as you write in your book, to her story than that. The highs and the lows, the struggles, the failures. And she says, my story is a lot darker and messier than what people might have read. So I'm very keen to hear all of that again from you and not from me. Thank you so much, Ramla, for joining us and for this beautiful and brilliant book.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to ask you, your roots, and it comes across all the way through, are so important to you. But you came over here at a very young age, a long time ago. It's not necessarily your own memories that you write of, but you say, fighting was in my family's DNA. I was Ramla Ali, a strong Somali woman born to a family of fighters.
Yeah.
In a different way than you then went on to fight. But tell us what you mean by that.
So, how would I word it? So just everything that we went through as a family, my mum, she lost a son, I lost a brother, how brave they had to be to, get past that. how brave my mum had to be to get all her kids to safety. You know, she felt like she could never be sad around us. She always had to keep a strong face, and she always had to show bravery, because for her to show the bravery, it meant that we could learn from her, if that makes sense. Yeah, all of that, you know, that's everything. Everything that my family are: brave, intelligent, just amazing human beings. I feel like all of that is in me as well. Have I answered the question? Sorry.
Yes.
I know I said I'm not going to be nervous today, but I'm trying not to look at the audience, and I'm just getting really nervous again.
Well, we're all getting used to seeing real people in front of us.
Yeah.
We've literally gazed at blank screens for ages, but it's very lovely to do, and you have absolutely no reason to be nervous. I mean, we do, in the presence of your amazing story and what you've gone on to, what you've achieved. But perhaps you could explain, I mean, in terms of that story of coming over here, you say in the book, and I know this from speaking to you in the past, that one of the things that explains just how tricky that all was that you and your siblings don't know the day of your birth, your birthday. But why is that?
So I speak about this in the book. We were born, all of us, apart from my youngest brother, who was born in the UK. We were all born during the Civil War, so the height of the Civil War in Somalia. And, you know, not a lot of, emphasis was placed on any form of records: birth certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates. So when I was born, and obviously when we fled, it was all just lost. When we fled, the only thing we could take were just clothes, and that was it. We weren't really allowed to take any valuables, because we were told, you know, the boat that we were gonna escape on could only house, is that the right word? House 200 people. So, you know, you had to keep what you took to a minimum. And then a lot of people, you know, have asked me, like, but does your mother not know? Like, it's her child. How does she not know? But the thing that I've always said is, my mum went through such a traumatic time, and, you know, it's okay that she doesn't know, and I've never blamed her because of it, because of everything that she did for us since, like, after that time. She brought us to the UK. We were all safe. She made sure that we all got an education. You know, we were never allowed to get anything below a B. Like, we would be scared to come home and show that we got a C or something. So all her kids were very well educated. My mum, who I, you know, speak a lot about in the book, she was not allowed to go to school. So she's illiterate. And the one thing she always said was, all my kids have to have an education. So I've got a brother who's a doctor. Of course, he's my mother's favourite. And then, you know, I've actually got a law degree as well, funnily enough. I've got two sisters who are nurses. I've got another, I'm just going to list. I'm bragging now. But yeah, we've all been to uni, and we've all got degrees. And obviously I didn't use my law degree, but, you know, I'm very proud that I, you know, got an education as well.
And I want to come back to your mum, because, as you say, she comes up lots in the book, and there's lots. She's interweaved into your story in a huge, huge way, and and still certainly is, and will be. But tell us about what it was about boxing, how you came across it, and were lured in. It was sort of accidental.
It was very accidental. I was an overweight teenager, to the point where, you know, the doctor told my mum I'm obese, and I was heading down a very dangerous path. And as a mother, you really don't want to hear that. And as a 12-year-old, you definitely don't want to hear that. So, you know, as a result, my mum got me a gym membership to the local leisure centre. And from there, I stumbled across a boxercise class. It was funny, because the very first lesson that I signed up for, I was too afraid to walk in. So I literally just kind of tiptoed and peeped my head through the window, and then just walked straight away and straight back the other way, because it was just, everyone that I saw in there didn't look anything like me. And it was very scary as a 12-year-old to just walk in by yourself. But, you know, the one thing I told myself is, you have to be brave, you have to do it, and you have to put yourself in these uncomfortable situations, because only then will you know if something is for you, and only then will you know if you love doing this thing. So you have to put yourself in this uncomfortable situation, and I'm really glad that I did, because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that.
Did you instantly just love it as a sport, as an activity?
100%. Like, the one thing I loved, a lot of people asked me, what is it that you first fell in love with boxing? And this is such a basic answer, so I'm so sorry. But it's literally that I didn't have to think for myself. I was in the gym, and, I was learning how to use the treadmill, and learning how to use the what's it called? That CrossFit machine. What's it called? The cross trainer. That's it, yeah. The cross trainer. And I was learning how to use that, and it was really boring, because at that time there wasn't this day of social media where you can click on someone's page and they'll give you 10 tips for the perfect booty, or 10 tips for this. Like, you had to literally make this stuff up in your head. And so that's what I really loved, that I didn't have to think for myself, and someone was telling me what to do. And at the same time, I was getting fit, I was gaining loads of self-confidence, my self-esteem was just like flying high. And, it was just a really fun place to be.
You said you didn't see anyone who looked like you, and we talked about representation, and you talk about representation all the way through the book a lot, because it's so important to you, and it's so important, obviously. But at that time, then, did you see anyone were there any role models for you, particularly being a woman in the boxing world?
No, there were, like I said, nobody looked like me in that class, and you'd put on TV and no one looks like you on TV. And I've been doing loads of press for this book, and I was asked, did you, starting out boxing, did you envisage yourself becoming a full-time athlete at that time? And the one thing I've said is no, because I never saw someone who looked like me as an athlete on TV. And yes, what Jyoti was saying earlier, representation is so important, and you can't be what you can't see. So if I couldn't see me anywhere on TV, on bus advertisements, and on magazines and things like that, I could never dream of doing it. So at that time, I didn't see myself becoming a full-time athlete.
And that's actually sort of spurred you throughout this journey, hasn't it? It comes across, and particularly in the writing, why you've written this book, and sort of who it's for, and what's behind your drive to write and tell your story and to keep going, to make sure that other people aren't in that scenario.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I wrote this book for the little me, like the little 12-year-old me, the little chubby 12-year-old me. That's who I wrote this book for. It's the friend that I wish she had. There's loads of nuggets of wisdom in this book, which I love. And yeah, it's just that friend for that little girl, the friend that I wish I had growing up.
You're right, there are loads of nuggets. They come at the end of each chapter and sprinkled all the way through. But let's come back to your mum and your family. It was a long time before you were able to tell them. And you write almost, I think, until sort of 3/4 of the way through the book, of this double life that you're leading. And actually, when it comes to telling them, you then give up for 6 months, I think.
Yeah.
But what comes across, and we were talking about it before, is that despite this frustration, you say their belief system went against your happiness.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you really empathise with their reasons for doing it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, I was unhappy that I had to give up for such a long time, but I did empathise with their reasoning behind it. Like, my mum, she lost a son in Somalia. We came to I don't speak about this in the book, but we came to the UK, and one of my cousins was stabbed outside of his school over a £10 bet. So, she obviously wanted to keep me safe, and she considered the sport of boxing as a very dangerous sport. Not just for me, but I'm sure if my brother was in the same situation, she'd encourage him to stop as well. So I completely understood her reasoning behind wanting me to quit. Obviously she used religion and things like that, because she knew saying those things would sort of make me be a bit more, what's the word, when you listen to someone, what's
Receptive.
yeah. Is that the right word? Sorry. Yeah, using that, but I know deep down that her main reasoning behind it was to ultimately keep me safe. And so that is the reason why I kept it hidden for such a long time. You know, I didn't mind keeping it hidden for such a long time because it meant that I could pursue my passion. But at the same time, I didn't have this support system at home. So I had to sort of be brave for myself, and I had to, you know, be my own hero and, you know, learn to be my own champion.
And now, how does it all work now with your family and your career?
Oh, it's like complete 360. There's this like really cool story that I write in the book of the very first time my mum called me up. So this is the very, very first time we ever spoke about. Oh,
No,
sorry.
I was trying to do. It was a very emotional part of the book. That was a tear that when
Oh, I
reading
thought you
it.
meant my
It was a very emotional moment of the book when you write this story.
Yeah, so it's the very first time my mum called me, and this is the very first time that we ever spoke about boxing. And she called me to, you know, to tell me good luck and to say that she was thinking of me, and, you know, that she'd pray that I'd be safe and I wouldn't get hurt. And I think, you know, the feeling that I got in that conversation was better than the feeling that came, you know, in that tournament, because, you know, I won the tournament, but that medal meant nothing. The phone call meant so much more.
And you talk about boxing and the sort of way you bring the world of boxing to life is extraordinary throughout the book as someone who doesn't know much about the sport. And, you know, there's a perception of it as quite so violent. You make it sound more of a dance.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it about boxing that you find so exhilarating? Because also I feel like the book is a bit of an appeal to a wider audience to get involved, to come and watch boxing, to come and kind of give it the support it needs.
100%. I mean, I tried not to get too technical with boxing. I didn't want people to go, you know, fall asleep. But the way I tried to write about it is like it's art. It's like watching art. You know, if you watch a very good technical boxer and the way they dance around the ring with their amazing footwork, it's just incredible to watch. And that's how I tried to write it. And I'm glad that that's what you got from it, which is so cool. And yeah, like, I feel like a lot of people would love coming to, you know, take the brutality out of it, all the blood and everything else, but the sportsmanship that follows afterward, like, you pay so much respect to your opponent. That is very beautiful to watch.
Yeah, the camaraderie and the kind of team spirit, again, something in the book that you have found so important and has just been a huge part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I tried to write that as much as possible to show that, you know, it isn't just this sport where people are just back-talking each other and just saying nasty things about each other to build up a fight, but it's just so much it's so much more beautiful than that. It's like watching poetry, and, you know, there's this amazing camaraderie that follows, and yeah.
But it's also was just struck me this part in the book where you are sort of almost imploring people to come and support it, particularly to support women boxing, because the pay gap is so huge, and in order to change that, we need to get people there cheering their hearts out for the sport.
I feel like, you know, the pay gap is just ridiculous between men and women. It's not even this small, it's like this big. And the reason being is that, you know, there's so much demand for men in sport. Like, so many people will go and watch, I don't know, Arsenal v Chelsea. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know anything about football. But so many people, like, the stadiums will be packed
Arsenal
out.
v Chelsea's fine, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, okay. The stadiums will just be packed out, whereas the women, it's not. And I feel like it's the same in boxing as well. You know, not a lot of people will go and watch female boxers, but, like, everyone, like, AJ's fighting tomorrow. I'm sure everyone knows who AJ is, and he's sold out a 70,000 seat arena. That's crazy. A woman could never do that. But in order for this pay gap to decrease, more people need to get behind women, and more people need to support women, because only then will you see significant changes in the pay.
I think the book really does. It inspires people to do so. So hopefully the crowds will start filling with people brandishing the book. And you talk a lot about vulnerability in the book. And I said at the start in the introduction that you're very keen to point out, your story is darker and messier than the kind of list of successes. You said taking my isolated successes on their own, model, boxer, etc., isn't even half of your story. Why is it so important to you to write this book that kind of is so honest about that, as it is, the many times that you failed and didn't succeed that are littered throughout the book? Why was it so important to you to kind of bring those to the fore?
I feel like, we live in this age of social media where, people will, I don't know, filter and alter their pictures and it doesn't even look like them. Imagine they go missing and that's the only picture they have and nobody knows what they look like. But like more than that, people will only post. Could you imagine? People will only post their wins and never their losses. But, I talk about in the book that it's okay to lose and it's okay to earn your losses because only then can you, use that as fuel to get the win the next time, because when you get the win the next time it's all the more sweeter. And that's why it was important for me to write about losses. I wanted to be more relatable to everyone else. You have all these like amazing athletes around the world, the Usain Bolts and the Serenas who just always seem to win, and you can't relate to them. How do you relate to people that are just like you? As a normal human being, I feel like it's easier to relate to somebody that has lost a lot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are lots of themes that we were exploring earlier that sort of interweave. I'm sure you were nodding earlier as we were talking about the other books, and you guys will come back on in a moment and we can explore them with the audience. But one of the things you write about is when you're developing, you decide not to go for Team GB anymore, but to do Team Somalia.
Yeah.
And you meet people who really change the way you think about Somalia. You say the ways you see your country represented is so critical in informing the way you see yourself. All it takes is one person to change the way you see a place and the way you see yourself. So I wonder if you could explain to people what you meant by that, how your sort of perception of your heritage changed along the way.
I think what I meant by that was similar to what Jyoti was saying earlier about representation. I was obviously going to be the first, and I knew I was going to be the first, and it was really, really scary because I knew in being the first there will be so many eyes on me, and that pressure made me feel sick. But more than that, I knew that I had to be brave to be the first person, because I was then in a position to inspire all these like incredible young boys and girls who, might be from the same background as I am. And it allows them the opportunity to dream, because they'll see me and say, oh, well, we came from the same place. If she can do it, then I can do it too. And, that's I think that's why I wrote about it, because it was really important.
And how different? One of the most extraordinary things that you did really is just from scratch with your husband, who I think is here, who also is in the book a lot. You two did decide.
He's hiding.
He's one of him and your mum, the big stars of the book. But he and you decided, as I say, for you not to compete for Team GB, but to create the Somali boxing team.
Oh God, that was headache. It was like a year of back and forth emails. Basically, we created this Somali federation from scratch. There was, I think the last time anyone competed for Somalia was in 1970 something, when the then president, thought it was just such a brutal sport, and he said no more. So there was no federation, and in order to, compete for Somalia, I literally had to make a federation from scratch. And it was like a year of back and forth emails between ourselves and the International Boxing Association. But, they finally saw the merits in me competing for Somalia. Like I said, I would be inspiring a whole generation to not only just take up the sport of boxing, but just like take up sport in general. Somalia is like a country that is just, the diets are just not good. Like there's a huge number. There's a significantly high. There are significantly high numbers of obesity. My mum being one of them. Sorry, mum. But yeah, so if I could inspire a lot of people to take up sport, then that would be good.
I mean, you say that, and just before we go into the questions, talking about obesity, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning how important or how much interwoven the way you saw yourself and your image was changed by going into boxing. But it was complicated in boxing, and I learned a lot about it from your book, because there is a great pressure even then when you're in the boxing world to be a certain weight. And how did you navigate the kind of complications around that?
I suffered a lot with eating disorders because, you know, boxing, like a lot of combat sports, is a weighted sport. You get weighed either the day before or on the day, and I just did everything wrong. I didn't have a proper nutritionist, and I just thought, for me, if I starved myself, that was me working hard, and it wasn't really good. And that's one thing that I, you know, had to be brave in talking about. I never spoke about it before the book. Sorry, I forgot the question.
Oh, just exactly. As you've answered it perfectly. We were just talking about those difficulties navigating the weights that you had to be, and how you overcame that.
Yeah, I feel like it was important for me to talk about it. I know a lot of people go through the same thing, and you know, and a lot of people might not be brave enough to speak about it. But like I said, there's always got to be the one person, and I had to be brave enough to be that person. So hopefully, now a lot more people can speak up about it as well.
And just lastly, what then is? I mean, your life. There's a moment in the book where you're packing to go to India, and Richard is saying, "Come on, we're going to miss the plane," and your brain is going through just the extraordinary amount of things that have happened to you since you came and since you became a boxer. All those just extraordinary moments of just, I think you call them extreme happiness.
Yeah.
What's next? What's now and what's next?
Well, I'm not writing a book, that's for sure.
What? No more books?
This has consumed my life. I'm glad I've done it. It's been amazing. It's been amazing this past month, doing all this press for this book has been amazing, because I've, you know, had the opportunity to be interviewed by such amazing people, such as yourself. So that's been good. But I'm just really looking forward to, you know, doing what I do, going back to training, and then I'm hoping to compete at the end of the year, sometime in December.
Well, thank you as well, very, very much indeed, for your brilliant book. And I feel like, I'm sure that you guys have questions. I'm sure I have many more if I don't. But do you guys want to pop back onto the stage to join Ramla? And we'll, I think that there should be microphones. Have you got microphones? But definitely, oh, thank you. I know that it's always the first person to ask a question that takes a little bit of time, but don't go away wishing you had, because it's such a rare opportunity to ask these three extraordinary writers and women a question. So is anyone going to kick us off? Yes, there we go. Brilliant. You're the first, and then there'll be a flurry. So thank you very much. Yeah. You can stand up if you like. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Ramla, because she talked about her inspiration for boxing and stuff, and all I kept thinking about was Muhammad Ali, she's Ali too. Would that not be a kind of a thing that went
A lot
around?
of people have actually asked, is that Muhammad Ali's granddaughter? And you know,
that's what somebody said to me straight away when they saw me reading the book. They were like, "Oh yes, I know exactly who she is. She's."
I sometimes say yes to get them to come and watch me, to you know, drive more people to watch female athletes. So sometimes say yes, but sadly no. But no, one thing that he did speak so openly and honest about is that, you know, he doesn't always want to be remembered for what he did in the ring, which was some incredible things, but he always wants to be remembered for how much he gave back outside of the ring. And at the start you mentioned, you know, I do a lot of charitable work and things like that. I run this I started in 2018. We spoke about in the book initiative called Sisters Club, which has now become a charity. It offers free weekly self-defense classes to women, and it's open to all women. But my particular focus is on women who are from religious minorities, ethnic minorities, and women who've suffered from domestic violence and domestic abuse, because I feel like those are the women who find it hardest the most to gain access to sport. And I hope that answers the question.
I mean, perhaps you might just say, I mean, it's extraordinary reading about that in the book and how it ties into your experience of just how much confidence that sport gave you. For example, it was bullies who at school kind of drove you to how much boxing changed your attitude towards that, and how you've helped other women do the same.
Yeah, that was the aim of starting Sisters Club. It wasn't really a class where you just come and get fit for an hour and leave because you got a bit of a sweat on, but it was you come, you actually learn how to box, and you actually learn how to defend yourself. And for me, it was really important to teach those things to these women, because anyone can go anywhere and do a HIIT class, but having the confidence to walk alone at night and to feel safe. And, having this feedback that I got a few months after, a few of the women were telling me that they did feel confident walking alone at night, just showed me that I did my job right.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant what you're doing. Who's going to go next? Yes. Did you have a question? No, I thought you were about to. There's someone else? Anyone else? Yes, that back there, yeah.
The lone warrior.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm going to disappoint you there because I don't have a question. I just wanted to say to these lovely, incredible women, well done. I feel... I mean, reading about you was the reason I'm here, but then hearing from your incredibly inspiring stories. For instance, Ramla, you've just spoken about, domestic abuse. So I currently sit on a domestic abuse working group at university. And I think there's a myriad of stories that I can relate to, or that I know someone who can relate to. And I just want to say well done. Keep empowering. In this day and age, Black and ethnic minority women doing what they're doing. You're inspiring a whole generation. So that's all I wanted to say.
You didn't disappoint at all. That's not those sorts of things are just as welcome.
You can tell the women if they want to come to Sisters Club. We've opened up because it's become so big, and now I have incredible funding from Nike and Sports Direct. We've managed to open up North, East, South, and West. So if they did want to come, we have really amazing, incredible coaches. If they did want to come just for an hour a week, just to have a bit of fun with other women and learn how to box, they're more than welcome. It's a free weekly self-defense class.
When you hear, I think one of the things that I was interested to ask, and when you hear the reaction, how have you found generally the reception since your book went out into the world? How have you found that?
Humbling, honestly. Surprising, I guess, as well, because I think that I definitely suffer a little from imposter syndrome, but I just don't think I was really expecting the reaction that I received, and I still remember the first Goodreads review, which basically wasn't my mum or my best friend or my editor commenting on the book, and I was just so blown away. I cried, and I was just so touched that people cared enough to read the book, and people were interested in the topics that were raised, and that people really wanted to actually know about this story. And so, yeah, I think just generally for me that the whole experience has been so overwhelming because it has been so positive. It's been a really, really positive experience. I know you haven't got there yet, but
Yeah, no,
you're on your way.
I've had a similar experience just from obviously when I was announced as the winner. It was on social media and it was all very public, and it was, I think people were waiting for some good news because we'd all been in lockdown, and there were lots of people who were very happy to celebrate with me. And I think you mentioned earlier, but it was similar for me in that I think the messages that meant the most to me were people that I didn't know from the Gujarati community around northwest London, where the book's set and where I grew up, who were reaching out to me to say how much it meant that I'd won and that I was writing a story about their experiences and about my experience and about the community that we've grown up in this like little pocket of London where there's so many Gujarati families. And that, like what you mentioned earlier, similar, it meant so much to me because I thought it means so much because if I was younger, again, like what you were saying, you wrote the book for yourself. I wrote this never thinking that it would be published, and I wrote it for myself because it was what I would have loved to read as a kid, seeing people like me and the nuances of my experience in a book. So yeah, it's been so positive, and again, like so grateful to Murky and to Penguin and to everyone in the industry who's making room.
Were you writing during lockdown?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Because a lot of you nod your head. So a lot of people have found that experience either exhilarating and just the world of a writer, perfect, locked down, or very difficult not to be able to kind of get out and do the research.
I think for me, because obviously we've had a few lockdowns now, the first couple I couldn't write because there was so much unknown and I couldn't find like the stability to sit and write. But it was really in the very last lockdown, so earlier this year and at the tail end of last year, where I felt like I was like, okay, we're in lockdown again. It's fine. I know what's happening, and I found a bit of stability and peace and space around my day. So normally, like when I would be commuting, I would just use that time to write. But I think I really admire people who, like in the very first lockdown, were able to just go into writing because I found personally like the instability and the anxiety around what was going to happen. I found it quite difficult to draw creatively like during that time. But again, I think it's different for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience was quite funny because I wrote the whole novel before the COVID pandemic kind of emerged or erupted. I finished writing the first draft around December, so it was around the time it was kind of erupting in China, but hadn't kind of made its way over to this country yet. And then there's like a certain amount of lead time that you need before it's published, and so it was completely ready to go. And then Penguin said to me, well, because of this completely unprecedented situation, we're going to delay publication. And I'd spent 6 months in a self-imposed lockdown. I hadn't seen any friends, I hadn't seen any family, I'd not gone to weddings, all my annual leave I'd just spent writing the book. And then they were like, yeah, you've got an extra 9 months and we've got a lockdown. So, and I was like, this is great, this is just great. So I actually didn't revise it too much in those 9 months because I was like, I've already done this to myself. So I was kind of ironic and annoying. But
unless you've got a lockdown story, I'm going to check to see if there are other questions from...
I enjoyed lockdown actually. It's quite nice. Just waking up in your pajamas every day, not having anything to do. It's quite nice.
And now back into the rings of the stadiums. There's time for some more questions. As I say, I know what it's like. I've been to these when I'm in the audience, and you walk away and you wish you'd asked. We're in a very like relaxed and nice atmosphere here. So if you did have a question, there's a couple of minutes left. Yeah.
I just wondered, one of the things that you talked about was gatekeepers and needing more diverse gatekeepers. I work in the creative industry as well, and like one of the things that I find is that when you're not quite one of the gatekeepers but on the cusp of it, what can we do to like try and lift these stories? Because at the moment I'm currently in a position where like I want to be able to do that within my role, but I'm not quite at that level to be able to be one of those people that can lift up these stories. What can we do collectively, I guess, like in a way to be able to do that?
I think that's a really big question, and I think Ramla touched on it earlier when she was talking about just being that one person who does whatever you can. And I think it's such a big thing to try and change, and all we can do as individuals is do our bit and do our best and look at all the opportunities that are available and try and promote them. Like I get asked so much by friends who want to write who are also minorities, like, if I have a list of, initiatives like the Murky Books New Writers Prize and other ones that I was sort of collating to share with them. And I have that ready. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I do. So when I get approached by someone who says, do you have any tips? Like, I'm also from a minority background. I don't know how to get into the industry. I say, here's a list of like initiatives, like, follow all these agents or publishers and schemes on social media, and it's just doing that small thing, I think, and it's a really, like I said, a big effort, and it's just, if I think it's something that, it's such a big responsibility, and I think just doing your little bit however you can and having conversations with people and speaking about it and seeing the changes you can make, I think collectively that will hopefully be enough.
I'd probably just add to that, again, touching on what Ramla said earlier. When there's demand for these kinds of texts, and it's mainstream demand, everybody, not just people of color, not just people who want to see their stories represented, but everybody wants to read more about these topics. You can, these stories then obviously become more, popular. And I think you can get more gatekeepers when you have the kind of demand there and established. So one of the things that I think is really important are initiatives like Merky, which are in these established institutions, because they're laying the groundwork for putting these stories into the mainstream, which then boosts the demand, which then hopefully gets more people into that level of the publishing world. And that's obviously what Merky's trying to do as well, because their team and the people that they hire are people, like Jyoti was saying earlier, who are interested in these stories and relate to these stories and are people of color and from, diverse backgrounds. So I think, we can all do our part. We should all be interested in reading everybody's stories, because that's what stories are for, after all, teaching us about everything, everyone.
Yeah,
Empathy.
absolutely. And I think also to add, I think speaking to people when they're at school about the career options available to them is so important. I would have absolutely loved to work in publishing, but I just thought there's no way that's going to happen for me. It's so competitive, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. So it's something that I cast aside. But if I'd have been at school, and I know I had friends who took different paths. Like I mentioned earlier, was lucky enough to really push to go and study English at uni because I loved it so much. But I wish there was more support when I was at school to tell me that I could one day maybe have a career in publishing as an editor and as an agent. And I think getting those conversations early on when kids are thinking about where they want to be, that will also mean that there are more people who are gatekeepers because the path has been created earlier on. So I think that's like a bigger piece of work as well, that it'd be really interesting to see if work can be done in that space.
Yeah, we never got things like that.
Yeah, not at all. And especially, I think we mentioned earlier, but coming from minority backgrounds, those careers they'd never feel accessible to us anyway, because we've come, from families who have come to this country to try and make a living, and we've had experiences where we've known how important it is to get an education and to have a job that's stable. We haven't had the luxury of,
being able to dream.
Yeah, exactly.
You had to get one of those, jobs that you can stay in forever.
Exactly.
Doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Exactly.
If you weren't one of those three, you were a failure. I bet I'm a failure in front of
And
my
now
mum.
we have champion boxer and 2 prize-winning writers. It's been a real treat talking to the 3 of you. I'm so grateful to you for coming in, for your brilliant books, and thank you very, very much, everyone, and for being here. It's wonderful to see so many of you, as I say, in real life, in person. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.